This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. The federal pay raises are dead. The House and Senate voted today to kill 50% wage hikes for Congress, federal judges, and some other government officials who had not had raises in a while. Without the no vote, the raises were to become automatic at midnight tonight. This only helped fuel outrage and intense lobbying against the pay raises. It was especially bruising for House Speaker Jim Wright. His troops left him, forcing him to reverse course and schedule the pay raise vote to kill. CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer begins our coverage of the wage wars of Washington.
As Speaker Jim Wright strode into the chamber today, all sides knew the raise was dead, but the handful who'd been willing to come out for it publicly were determined to go down swinging.
I hope that the demagogues among us will rejoice.
Old hands couldn't remember a time when any issue has set tempers so on edge.
The past week, I've heard about as much as I can stomach. I am proud to be a member of this great institution, proud of my service, and proud to vote in favor of a pay raise, and I hope you join me.
Members were mad at each other and madder still about news coverage.
We became cartoon cannon fodder for trash television and for talk radio.
The raise would have kicked in automatically tomorrow unless both the House and Senate voted against it, and many who had come out against the raise in public were secretly hoping that would come about.
The private communications among members to the leadership were, we'd like the majority, we'd like to have the raise, we don't want to vote.
But once opponents forced today's on-the-record vote, the outcome was predictable. The raise lost in a landslide. Opponents of the raise gloated, but there were no real winners today. The members not only got no raise, but all sides agreed that Congress itself lost in the eyes of the voters.
But I have never seen where you can get away with doing something undercover.
House Speaker Wright also took heavy hits personally for at first refusing to bring the issue to a vote.
In terms of the Speaker, it's cost him the respect and the loyalty of many members of the House of Representatives.
One somewhat overlooked casualty in all of this is the one-time plan to outlaw honoraria, the fees that members of Congress are now allowed to keep when they make speeches to lobbyists and other special interest groups. One congressman said tonight, with no raise in pay coming, outlawing honoraria would mean a pay cut, and no one's of a mind to do that. Bob Schieffer, CBS News at the Capitol.
From House Speaker Jim Wright's home district in Texas,
why, them fellers is making more money now than they ever did in the history of the world.
To chilly Kansas City.
And then we're going to give somebody that's already making $95,000 a year, $45 additional $1,000. That's crazy.
To Andy Trevino's gas station in Lima, Pennsylvania. The only thing frostier than the Arctic cold wave these days has been taxpayer response to the pay raise.
No, they shouldn't get a pay raise. In fact, they ought to take a cut.
Talk radio strangled this congressional goose. Listeners all over the country were urged to update a page in history, join the teabag revolution. 60,000 more teabags and letters arrived in Washington today to encourage the president to kill the pay raise, too.
We took literally thousands of phone calls from people who were opposed to the pay raise. Those people in turn called friends, they called the Congress, they called the president.
They ought to take a cut in pay, just like all the millions of other Americans it's had to do.
It was the radio revolution. Surveys indicated over 80% of Americans opposed the pay hike. There was anger from the man and woman on the street.
I think it comes up way too often. I mean, they're always coming up. It's time for a raise.
They knew what the wages were when they went in office. And a lot of people spent money and lots of money getting them in. Let them pay them. Over the counter, not under.
But the taxpayers' victory over Congress likely means the old system continues. Outside income, speakers' fees paid by lobbyists.
I think it's a hollow victory because attached to the pay raise was a promise that they would also ban honorariums.
No, it's not going to happen this time, and back in Texas, the good old boys have a pretty good idea why.
They're afraid of the voters, all they're afraid of now.
Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Killing the pay raise deal leaves federal judges and other top government workers making less than they could get in jobs outside government. CBS News national correspondent Phil Jones reports now on the downside of knocking down the pay raise after the cheering stops.
Well, it may be easy for the critics to say the congressional pay hike isn't justified, but here in bureaucratic heaven, where more than 12,000 other federal officials got hit in the pocketbook today, it was a different story.
You're going to lose your top people, your excellent people.
For many bureaucrats, it didn't seem fair. When their favorite Washington football quarterback, Doug Williams, makes $1.7 million a year, today's congressional action appeared to be short-sighted.
So what you have is an impact not only on these members of Congress, who voted it down overwhelmingly, but on critical services like the National Institute of Health.
Indeed, top salaries at NIH are now $90,000 a year. This raise would have increased salaries to $120,000, still under what can be made outside government.
In the last 10 years, 28% of our senior scientists have left the NIH, almost all of them to far more attractive situations on the outside. And we have not succeeded in that same 10-year period in attracting one senior scientist in here.
The judiciary was also counting on a pay hike.
More federal judges left the bench during the period from 1969 to 1986 than had left the bench during the preceding 182 years of the Republic.
Susan Getzendanner is one of those federal judges who quit. She got tired of waiting for a pay raise.
Any person who's presently serving on the federal district court in Chicago could go out and quadruple their salary.
The President's Pay Commission recommended fairness for our public servants. But this is all history now, and while saving their own jobs, members of Congress may force others out of government. Phil Jones, CBS News, Washington.
Just what he didn't need, possible new trouble for the John Tower nomination to be Defense Secretary. The first signs of a possibly important split about Tower inside the Senate Armed Services Committee, the committee that is supposed to vote on whether to recommend Tower's confirmation by the full Senate. CBS News White House correspondent Leslie Stahl has the latest on Tower's fight to hang on and win. Leslie?
Dan, White House and congressional sources say they're convinced that the powerful chairman of that committee, Sam Nunn, is now against the Tower nomination. Tower expressed his misgivings personally to President Bush today in a secret Oval Office meeting. Sources say Nunn's concerns include those new allegations of drinking, but are not limited to them. And there are signs that other Democrats on the committee share Nunn's apprehensions.
I suspect that if we had a vote right now, the vote might not be unanimous, as most people thought it would be earlier. I'm convinced that John Tower at one time, months or years ago, had a serious problem with alcohol.
Committee Republicans say they're angry over the delays, but those who have been briefed by the FBI say that there is nothing in the investigation that should disqualify Tower. But Democrats late this evening say that that FBI report is not complete and that there are new allegations. Dan?
Well, Leslie, if Senator Nunn is against Tower, his nomination is dead, isn't it?
Well, that's unclear. You know, John Tower was a member of the club up in the Senate. A lot of these Democrats did serve with him on this committee, and there is that connection. And the White House and President Bush is still fighting very hard for this nomination, Dan.
Quickly, Leslie, any details on these alleged new charges?
Well, Dan, the committee vote was delayed last week because of a tip from a San Francisco man who contacted us this morning. His story was that he witnessed a drunken encounter between Tower and a Russian-born dancing school owner. The FBI, however, sources tell us, has been unable to corroborate any of his story, and Dan, we were unable to corroborate as well.
Thanks, Leslie. President Bush traveled to Capitol Hill today to begin selling the budget package he will propose to Congress Thursday, mindful that Democrats control both houses of Congress and will have a big say over what happens to the national agenda. President Bush's consultations included some top Democrats. Mr. Bush talked up bipartisanship, but for the first time, he openly talked down actually being able to deliver in this budget on all of his campaign promises to improve the quality of life in America. Some promises, said President Bush today, quote, will have to be deferred. He didn't say which ones. And still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, Peter Van Sant on Fat Tuesday in a tough time in New Orleans. And David Browning on a group who came 25 years ago today and never really went away. State Department came out with its annual report on human rights today. It praised the Soviet Union for what it called, quote, remarkable moves toward freedom, and it criticized Israel for Israel's alleged violence against Arabs in the Israeli-occupied territories. Bill Plant has our report.
The shooting and beating of rebellious Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza by the Israeli military has provoked the harshest U.S. criticism of Israel in memory. In its annual report to Congress on human rights practices, the State Department charges that Israeli defense forces were unprepared for the Palestinian uprising of 1988 and reacted in a manner which led to a substantial increase in human rights violations. The report severely chastises Israeli forces who frequently used gunfire in situations that did not present mortal danger to troops, causing many avoidable deaths and injuries. Israeli officials reacted quickly to the report, which has not yet even been officially released.
I think that we deal with a situation which is a very tense situation, and which there is a confrontation not between just different political views, but an attempt to oust Israel from these territories.
Amnesty International, a private human rights organization, echoed official U.S. concerns of excessive violence and urged follow-up action.
Well, I think we can say things in a report like this and not do anything. And I think what we need to do is make sure that our words are followed up by actions, so that when Prime Minister Shamir meets President Bush, they'll talk about it.
U.S. officials downplay the annual report as nothing more than a required repetition of things that they've been saying all year. But privately, they acknowledge that it comes at a difficult time for Israel, which is already swimming against the current as it tries to get the U.S. to stop talking to the PLO. Bill Plant, CBS News, the State Department.
A spokesman for Israeli Prime Minister Shamir called the U.S. report a lot of exaggeration. But Arab leaders said it shows a new and more realistic American view of the Middle East. Correspondent Betsy Aaron has more about that.
Again, this is a very, very unique...
Representatives of Arab American organizations meeting in Washington today were elated over the State Department report.
I mean, the State Department has never been as sharply critical of Israeli practices before.
Previous efforts by the Arab American lobby to affect U.S. policy have met with limited success. But in December, the Reagan administration decided to talk to the PLO. In July, in Atlanta, the Palestinian statehood issue was for the first time debated on the floor of the Democratic National Convention. In the last year, 9 Democratic state conventions have passed resolutions calling for Israel's right to live in security and the Palestinians' right to self-determination or statehood. And this week, grassroots planning is underway to introduce the resolution at the California Democratic Convention.
Therefore, be it resolved that the California Democratic Party recommends a policy which supports the Palestinian people's right to self-determination.
We have gotten a large number of our delegates elected to the state convention. I think this is worrying people.
The Anti-Defamation League describes such efforts as anti-Israeli.
I believe it is essentially a negative effort. The effort to portray that effort as one promoting human rights and that sort of theme, I believe, is snake oil.
U.S. public opinion still appears more sympathetic towards Israel than the Arabs, more sympathetic towards Palestinian aspirations than the PLO. But in Washington, things may be changing.
Our numbers and our strength and the allies that we have are growing more numerous every day because people want peace in the Middle East.
Today, the Arab American Institute invited an advisor to PLO Chairman Arafat, Hani al-Hassan, to come to the United States to attend a leadership conference in Washington in 2 weeks. He's applied for a visa. No decision yet from the Bush administration as to whether he'll get it, Dan.
Thank you, Betsy. Straight ahead, a report from New Orleans.
There's nothing like a bowl of Campbell's soup.
My treat?
To warm things up.
That's what Campbell's soups are. Ooh, good.
Near freezing temperatures today didn't keep Mardi Gras revelers off Bourbon Street in New Orleans, but this year, even when the weather breaks, there'll be a big chill in the Big Easy. Peter Van Sant explains why.
Mardi Gras in New Orleans, a time of outrageous celebration when the city forgets its problems amid a festival of floats, music, and alcohol. But when the party is over, New Orleans tomorrow will again have to face the sobering fact that its citizens are being murdered at a rate never before seen in the city, a rate of nearly one a day. Most of the victims are young blacks who live in the city's projects. Most of the killings involve drugs.
The common thread through all of our homicide victims, I'd say 80 to 85% is crack cocaine. They're all people who are in the business of dope.
Don Guyton is a community activist who says crack has become the major industry in the projects, where unemployment runs as high as 80%.
No one is safe. This is a city that is about to explode. It's a complete war zone.
Casualties continue to mount on almost a nightly basis as simple arguments are settled with gunfire.
A jungle is a description that I like to use because in a sense it's dog eat dog or wild animal against wild animal. To a certain extent, it's almost like the Wild West.
Many were shocked when the killings began to move out of the projects. A pregnant jewelry store clerk recently was shot in broad daylight on one of New Orleans' busiest streets.
I'm always wondering who's next or where's next, or one of my friends will be next.
And 2 nights ago, another murder, just 2 blocks from the Mardi Gras parade route. A tourist was shot in the chest during a robbery.
People are kidding themselves that they think it's going to stay in the projects. It's not going to stay in projects. It's already gone beyond the projects.
City officials say what is happening in New Orleans is happening in most major American cities, but they fear that if the shootings continue, the city's vital tourist industry could be wounded in the crossfire. Peter Van Sant, CBS News, New Orleans.
Need my nutrition?
You'll need 12 boxes to equal the vitamin and mineral nutrition in just 1 box of Total. That's more nutrition than any other cereal.
That's more like it. 1 box, 1 bowl, 1 spoon.
From Moscow, our correspondent Barry Peterson reports now on how the Soviets are seeking to put the best possible face on defeat and retreat from Afghanistan.
In a dark corner of a Soviet military airfield last night, there was a homecoming seldom seen. The wounded gently lifted into an ambulance. No bands, no crowds. Today, Afghan troops moved quickly to replace Soviet soldiers, now gone from Kabul and withdrawing along the strategic Salang Highway. And among the images of the Soviet Union's retreat, an unusual documentary broadcast on Soviet television last night. It was a rare admission that for the men who served and for the families who lost loved ones, the pain will go on long after the fighting has stopped. I lost many good friends, says this veteran. It is very difficult to forget everything I saw there. The Soviets once said their death toll was 13,000. Today, they put the figure at 15,000, in part because of recent casualties during their retreat. Fewer and fewer Soviet troops remain in Afghanistan to protect the withdrawal.
This is one of the last outposts the Soviets will abandon. The border is only about 50 miles that direction. And the party line here is the same. We're sure the Afghan army will be able to take over the defense of the area. We're sure glad to be going home.
But beneath the party line, there is an emerging cynicism bred by years of fighting this hopeless war. It was wrong to come here, said this outpost commander. This is like Vietnam, a political war. No one can rule this country. The Soviet involvement in this war is soon over, but the country struggled to understand why its soldiers came here, why so many died, and for what is just beginning. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Balkh Province, Afghanistan.
Retired Swedish tennis star Bjorn Borg was rushed to a hospital in Milan today and treated for an overdose of sleeping pills. Italian press reports quoted police as calling it a suicide attempt, but a spokesman for Borg flatly denied that.
The first time I heard about Dr. Lax was when I was in the hospital.
Believe now, but a quarter of a century ago, they had to be identified as, quote, a wildly popular group of English recording stars. Then they made their American debut on the old Ed Sullivan Show, where they shared billing with the comedy team of Mitzi McCall and Charlie Brill and a tumbling group called the Four Fays. We don't know what happened to the comedy act or the tumblers, But as David Browning reports, music and life haven't been the same since the Beatles first came rocking and rolling in.
Love, love me do, you know.
Where were you when the Beatles first arrived in America 25 years ago today? Debbie Levitt was there in the crowd at the airport, screaming her head off.
Love me do.
First of all, you couldn't believe that they were actually here. They're standing in front of you, they're in the flesh, they're touchable. You want to just run out of that field and you just want to grab hold of them.
I love you.
And when the Beatles checked into the Plaza Hotel, Debbie Gendler was right there, screaming her head off.
When we heard one scream, we thought something was happening, so everyone else would start screaming. That simple.
It is impossible to underestimate the effect the arrival of the Fab Four had on American teenagers. Down south, a high school kid named Lee Atwater watched as the Beatles went on Ed Sullivan.
I wanna hold your hand.
They influenced everything. Me and the guys I was hanging around with started trying to wear boots. And of course, we got in a fight with our mothers real quick, particularly when we tried to grow Beatle haircuts.
I may be a little square. I don't know what Beatles means.
It just means us.
Back then, the establishment couldn't figure them out. Today, Beatle fans are the establishment. Debbie Gendler's in television in Los Angeles. Debbie Levitt's a New York dental secretary. And Lee Atwater was George Bush's campaign manager. He's now the first rock and roll chairman of the Republican National Committee, and is even trying to teach the boss a guitar lick or two. Paul McCartney is getting gray, but still making music and setting off squeals. Ringo Starr appears on a TV kids show. George Harrison has a movie company. John Lennon has been gone for over 8 years now.
We had great fun, and then we had great pain and misery together. And at this stage of my life, I can look back on it and really remember the good things about it.
You can't just eliminate it for 25 years of your life.
At least for a while. That's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather, see you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, mail-order drugs. They're cheaper, but are they safe?
Also, Tom Selleck and Joan Rivers on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS. Dear Walgreens, last evening near midnight, I had an